This is a private word, an inner teaching, not for public argument or for those who want to measure spirit with a yardstick of the five senses, but for the few who are willing to listen with the inner ear and read between the lines. And if only you will listen, you will hear something other than what the world has heard for 2,000 years. You will hear a sentence you thought you knew turn within you and say, "I am not what you were taught." "Go and sin no more" is not a scolding from a moral court. It is not a new law laid upon a weary human. It is the Christ speaking to the soul, and it carries a premise so radical that unless you accept the premise, you cannot hear the sentence. Do you see that? Do you follow that? Let us put the premise down first, for this premise governs every conclusion that follows, and without it, nothing I say will make sense. God is the only presence and the only power. There is not God and something else. There are not two powers doing battle for your life. There is only one life, one mind, one soul, one spirit, one law. And so what can be here but God and the effects of God? Nothing. If you hold that in your heart for even 10 seconds, you will see at once why moralism cannot be the meaning of that sentence. Because if God is infinite and indivisible, where is there a second self to be good or bad? Where is there a rival power to commit an act outside of God? There isn't any. Do you see that? Now hear this with your inner ear. Because if you keep your attention on sense testimony, on the gossip of eyes and ears, on the newspaper of appearances, you will lose the thread at once and fall back into moral debate. And I have not brought you here to polish arguments. I have brought you to discover a living secret. The world has heard, "Go and sin no more," as improve yourself, behave better, stop doing wrong. And so it has tried, and tried, and tried, and has found the same old struggle wearing a new suit, because the premise remained two powers. And as long as you stand in two powers, you will always come up against condemnation, against fear, against the repetition of yesterday's trouble in tomorrow's clothing. In this work, we are going to let the Christ sentence be what it is, an inner instruction that can only be obeyed from within the realization of oneness. We will begin by accepting that if God alone is, then sin cannot be what the senses say it is. It cannot be a list of behaviors to be counted and punished. It must be something subtler, nearer to the very way we see and accept life. And we will unfold that together, gently but with certainty. Stay with me. Do not argue with appearances. Do not try to fit this into your yesterday's categories. Rather, prepare yourself for a re-education of attention, because we will move from reinterpretation to practice. Practice that dissolves condemnation, that ends fear at its root, that breaks the wheel of repeated personal struggle. For now, hold the premise close. One presence, one power, and therefore a new hearing of that sentence. If you can grant me that, we can walk on together. Let us fix the premise so firmly that nothing can shake it. Not the news, not the body, not the chatter of the world. There is only one life, and that is God. There is only one mind, and that is God. There is only one soul, and that is God. There is only one Spirit, and that is God. There is only one law, and that is God. And so what can be here but God and the effects of God? Nothing. Do you see that? Do you follow that? The moment you grant two, the argument begins and never ends. The moment you accept one, the argument collapses and peace begins. Because there is no opposite power to contend with. There is no rival law to fear. There is not a second mind inventing evil. There isn't any. Now hold this and watch what happens to the word sin. If God is the only presence and the only power, what is there left to be a sinner? Where is the stuff of sin? What law sustains it? What mind conceives it? What life lives it? Do you see the impossibility? The world has taught sin as a behavior to correct, a ledger to balance, and so it polishes a humanhood, it tightens a conscience, it rearranges the furniture of the same room, but never leaves the room. And because it remains in two powers, God and not God, it must forever police and punish, and then apologize and try again. In the inner way, we do not treat sin as a thing, because there is no such thing as sin having presence or power or law in God. We discern that what calls itself sin is an acceptance, a belief, an interpretation that can be unlearned, and when it is unlearned, there is nothing to remove, because there never was a second presence to remove. Do you understand that? Follow me step by step and read between the lines. If there is only one law, what law enforces sin? If there is only one life, what life animates sin? If there is only one mind, what thought thinks sin? And if you say, the human mind, I say to you, that would be a second mind, and there are not two minds. There is not a private mind manufacturing realities. There is only the suggestion of such. And a suggestion without acceptance is a shadow without sun. Therefore, moralism must go. Not morality in the sense of kindness and decency, but moralism as a metaphysic must go, because it assumes two powers and thereby enthrones fear. As long as you stand there, you will whip yourself today and congratulate yourself tomorrow, and be none the freer, because you have never left the premise of separation. And now you can begin to hear the Master's word without the crust of centuries. He does not send the woman away to write a program of self-improvement. He does not assign her to the treadmill of worthiness. He releases her from a false identity by refusing the world's premise, neither do I condemn thee. And then he gives the only instruction that preserves freedom. Do not go back to the old premise. Do not return to the belief in separation that produced the picture. We are not scolded. We are awakened. We are not sentenced. We are identified correctly. And the practice that will unfold in you from this moment is not the effort to fix what God never made, but the willingness to unlearn what never had law. The instant you accept God as the only reality, the old house of moralistic sin collapses. And in that clearing a deeper meaning must be discovered. And we will take it gently, step by step, until you can say within yourself, thank heavens, there is only God here, and the effects of God, and I will not go back. Now we must name the single cause, or you will wander in the woods of 10,000 effects, and I will not leave you there. Listen with your inner ear and read between the lines. There is only one error, and that is hypnotism. Do you see that? Do you follow that? There are not 100 errors, and there is not an error for each person and each condition. There is not hypnotism and also a disease, and also a sin, and also a lack. No, there is only hypnotism appearing as these pictures. And the pictures differ as dreams differ, but the cause is one. The nature of error is summed up in one word, hypnotism. And the moment you catch that, the chase ends, the panic ends. Because you stop treating shadows as if they were substances. You stop arguing with mirages as if they were lakes. Do you see? How does this operate? Very simply, a suggestion comes. It comes as sense testimony. It comes as the voice of yesterday. It comes as a label, adulterous, failure, unclean. It comes as memory clothed in shame. It comes as a headline or a diagnosis. And the moment that suggestion is accepted, it becomes your experience. Not because God ordained it, not because there is a law to perform it, but because acceptance is the only power a suggestion has. Once accepted, fear rises to meet the picture. Then we fight it, then we punish it, and all the while we are swatting at images on a screen. We are scolding the water in a mirage, and exhausting ourselves without ever touching substance. Because there is only God and the effects of God, and these have no law in them to sustain a second presence. Now hear this, and let it cut a root. Moralism can be hypnotism, wearing religious clothing. And it is more dangerous for that very reason. Because it keeps the mind busy with effects, counting past actions, polishing reputations, rehearsing shame, creating a theology of worthiness. And not one scrap of that touches premise. Not one breath of that turns you from appearance to God. Do you follow that? As long as you accept the story that there is a separate self who did evil and must climb back to God, you remain under the spell. Because you have agreed to separation first and then tried to be pious inside it. And condemnation, of yourself or another, is the loudest hypnotic drum of all. It says two powers, two identities, fallen and unfallen. And the moment you believe it, you are back in the dream. Take the old illustration because it saves lives. A rope is misseen as a snake. The suggestion comes, danger. You accept it. The body reacts. You shout. You strike. You might even kill the rope. And still the terror does not leave because you are not dehypnotized. The only cure is to see the rope as rope, and the fear ends. You have not cured a snake because there never was one. Do you see that? So it is with what the world calls sin. You cannot cure it, and you cannot punish it, and you cannot reform it, because you are dealing with a picture that has no divine law behind it. You can only be dehypnotized of the belief in a self apart from God, and the picture dissolves of its own nothingness. Therefore, when the Christ says, "Neither do I condemn thee, go and sin no more," he is not saying, try harder, build a better mask, keep score and improve. No. He is saying, do not accept the suggestion again. Do not return to the belief in separation. Do not take back the label the world placed on you. Remain in oneness. The diagnosis is single, and the instruction is simple. Refuse the suggestion of two powers. Refuse the suggestion of a self apart from God. And you will discover in experience that what you feared was a mirage, and what you are is safe in God now. Now listen quietly and read between the lines. Do not let the old story rush in, because if you read this with the five senses, you will miss it again and go back to polishing a human record. A woman stands surrounded by accusation. The air is thick with the law of appearances, the voices of men, the stones in their hands, the verdict in their eyes, and all of it says, here is a separate self who has broken a separate law and must pay a separate price. Do you see that? But the Christ does not answer them from that court. He speaks from another realm of law, a realm in which God is the only presence and the only power, a realm in which condemnation has no oxygen because there are not two powers to oppose each other. There is not a second life to be judged. There isn't any. Neither do I condemn thee. Do not hear that as softness, sentiment, or moral leniency. Hear it as metaphysical accuracy. To condemn would be to agree that the appearance is real as presence and power, to nod yes to the hypnotic story and thereby strengthen the spell. The Christ will not agree with the picture. He will not take sides in the dream. He refuses to add his voice to the noise of sense testimony. In that refusal, the spell breaks. For the only life of error is your consent to it. In other words, when he withholds condemnation, he withholds the only power the picture could have had, your acceptance. And so the woman stands for the first time outside the narrative that named her. Do you follow that? Then the command, and it is a command of spirit, not of human reform. Go, and sin no more. Go, return to the street, to the market, to the ordinary rhythm of living, but go as one who has tasted reality and will not trade it back for shadows. And sin no more. What can that mean except, do not re-enter the belief in separation. Do not take again the suggestion of two powers. Do not slip back into the old identification of a condemned mortal in a material universe trying to reach God. In other words, do not let the rope become a snake again in your thought. You see, he frees her by refusing the world's premise, and then secures that freedom by giving her the only practice that preserves it. Remain in oneness. If you can hear this, you will understand why the sentence turns from scolding to salvation the moment the premise is 1. If Jesus' instruction is about consciousness, then the sin to avoid is not a list, but a direction of attention. It is the inward turning back to sense testimony after grace has revealed itself. It is the decision to let the newspapers and the eyes and the memory reframe you as a separate life again. In other words, the event is not the point. The premise is the point. The act is the picture. The separation is the suggestion. And to sin no more is to refuse the suggestion and abide in the presence. Hold this, because from here we will move into how to remain in that refusal, how to live in the world without returning to its hypnotic premise. And then you will see that the Master has not set an impossible task, but has handed you the key to freedom in daily life. Now we come to the shocking center, and I must say it so plainly and so repeatedly that you cannot miss it even if you try. Listen with the inner ear, read between the lines. Sin is not what you did. Sin is believing in separation again. Do you see that? Do you follow that? Sin is not the act in time, but the acceptance of a premise. It is the return to the belief that there are two powers, two realities, two selves, with two lives and two laws. And the instant you accept that suggestion, the picture reappears, wearing whatever costume your fear supplies. There is no such thing as a sin supported by God's law. There is no such thing as guilt established in God's mind. There isn't any. There is only the hypnotic suggestion of a self apart from God. And when that suggestion is believed, the dream begins, and you call the pictures me and mine. Do you see? What does separation look like? Let us make it visible to you, so you can catch it at the door. Separation is the belief that there are human beings apart from God, good ones and bad ones, sick ones and well ones, worthy and unworthy. It is the belief that there are powers apart from God, money power, medical power, legal power, evil power, each with a domain over you. It is the belief that there are lives apart from God, private life beginning and ending in matter. It is the belief that there are laws apart from God, material law to enforce decay and penalty. Do you understand that? And the minute you grant any of this as presence and power, you have returned to a material universe, and the old story starts on page 1 again. Not because God has changed, but because you accepted too. Now notice how subtle the return is. This is where you must be watchful. After inspiration, after a taste of grace, after a stillness in which you know God is, The mind slips out to check the senses. It peeks at the body. How is the pain? Is it less? Then at the bank account. Did the supply move? Then at the reputation. Do they approve of me now? Then at the relationship. Has the tension eased? And in that very seeking of proof in form, you have given authority back to form. You have said, matter is my lawgiver. Sense testimony is my judge. And that is the moment of sin. Not because you looked, but because you believed what you saw as reality. Do you follow that? Hypnotized consciousness sees two and begins to manage, to fix, to worry. Dehypnotized consciousness beholds one presence and one power and rests. Refuses to pick up the picture as cause. Refuses to argue with a mirage. Do you see the difference? Therefore understand the mercy of the Christ. He is not pardoning a real guilt, for there is no real guilt in God. He is dissolving a false premise. And when the premise goes, the picture falls apart. And then he instructs, do not accept that premise again. Sin no more means refuse the return to two powers. Refuse the belief that there is God and something else. Refuse the sense court that tries your life and pronounces you separate. And if you are tempted, and you will be, remember that temptation is only the suggestion to look back to sense for confirmation. And you can say within yourself, no, I know the one, and I abide there. In that refusal, quiet but absolute, freedom is not granted as favor, it is revealed as fact. And you stand where the woman stood, outside the narrative, because you have ceased to believe its author. Now take the plainest picture, because it will save you from years of useless struggle. When you drive down a hot road and see water shimmering ahead, you do not stop the car and fetch pails and rags and pumps to drain the highway. You do not organize a committee on puddle removal. You do not pray for evaporation. You discover there was no water. Do you see that? Do you follow that? And instantly the whole problem ends, not because you did something to a reality, but because you woke from a suggestion. So it is with what the world calls sin. You cannot cure sin as a thing because there isn't anything there to cure. There is only a suggestion, separation, appearing as a picture. And when you see through the suggestion, the picture loses you. The spell has no subject to cling to, and you walk on free. The minute you take up buckets and towels and programs to remove the water, you have granted presence and power to a mirage, and notice how it multiplies. You wipe here and the shimmer appears there. You reform this behavior and another flares. You apologize for yesterday and manufacture tomorrow's guilt in the very apology. Two more grow where one was before, because you are treating effects and feeding the suggestion with your belief. Take the snake that was a rope, because this is the anatomy of all moral struggle. A suggestion comes. Danger, guilt, unworthiness, lust, anger. Then acceptance, then fear. And at once the body reacts, and the mind organizes reforms and penalties. You shout at the rope, you strike it. You vow never to walk this path again. And still your heart races because you are not dehypnotized. Do you see that? Now hear me. Moral effort at the level of the picture is often only a sophisticated reaction to a suggestion. It looks pious. It feels strenuous. It wins you medals in the dream. But it never touches premise. It never questions whether there was a snake. The master does not say, wrestle better with snakes. He says, refuse the suggestion that made a rope into a serpent in your thought. And at once, the terror has no object to inhabit. This is why fighting sin multiplies it. The moment you agree, there is a sinner here to fight, You anchor identity in separation. You become the very thing you are trying to escape. A self apart from God, trying to become spiritual. And that is the treadmill. That is refined hypnotism in religious clothing. Do you understand that? You make vows, you break them. You improve the surface, you tighten the mask. And beneath it, the premise remains untouched. And so another symptom must appear to keep the dream intact. Condemnation of yourself is the most potent fertilizer of the field. It says two powers so loudly that the ground sprouts new pictures to prove you right. And you stand enslaved by your own agreement. The cure is not more willpower, not a sharper stick for the rope. The cure is dehypnotization, the quieting of sense testimony until spiritual sense awakens. And then you see what is. You see one presence and one power, and nothing to oppose it. You do not remove water from the road, and you do not remove sin from a self. You abide in God until the mirage has no believer. As your reaction to appearances subsides, healing appears of itself, because there is only God and the effects of God. And what looked like a battle dissolves for lack of a second combatant. Hold this, and in a moment we will take it into practice. How to hush the senses, how to rest in the inner place, so that the suggestion finds no doorway back into your house. Now we come to the hinge on which the whole door swings. And if only you will listen with your inner ear, you will not miss it. You can never be dehypnotized as long as you are judging by appearances. Do you see that? Do you follow that? As long as the 5 physical senses are reporting and you are granting their report authority, you remain in the court of 2 powers. So the first move is not to fix the picture, but to quiet the reporter, to hush the 5 senses until their testimony no longer dictates your premise. You cannot discover one presence and one power while interviewing the crowd of sights and sounds. The crowd will always give you 2, and 2 will always give you fear. There isn't any other outcome. How then do we hush these senses? Very simply, be still. Not as an athletic effort, but as a willing cessation of commentary. Turn within. Let the breath arrange itself. Let the reports of the day pass across the screen without taking residence in them. Do not push them away and do not invite them in. Just do not sign for the package. Sit or stand or walk, form does not matter. What matters is that you withdraw consent from the newspaper of appearances and open the inner window. In that pause, say nothing to get something. Make no mental effort to change a condition. Only acknowledge. Father, Thou art the only presence and the only power. There is one life, one mind, one soul, one spirit, one law. And I rest in that. Then be silent and let that announce itself. Do you understand that? When a thought of body or bank or reputation knocks, let it knock and pass. You do not throw it out and you do not entertain it. You simply will not adopt it as law. This is the awakening of spiritual sense, and without it, you have only the 5 senses and their hypnotic round. But with it, you begin to know what cannot be seen and hear what cannot be heard. I see that which is not visible. I hear that which is not audible. I feel that which is not tangible. In other words, I recognize presence before form admits it. I acknowledge power before events display it. And then the forms and events come into line because they are effects, never causes. Do you see that? As a musician hears the symphony on the page before an orchestra touches a bow, so spiritual sense knows God present, though the room is shouting otherwise. And the shout quiets because there was never law to sustain it. Now take the verse as your method. Go. Go to the market. Go to the office. Go to the kitchen. Go to the bedside. Go to the courtroom. but sin no more by taking appearances as law. Do you see how practical that is? Every step you take is the go. Every pause to hush the senses is the refusal to sin, which is the refusal to re-enter separation. So you walk the same streets without returning to the old premise. All day you touch things, you answer phones, you keep appointments, but inwardly you do not grant them power to define reality. When praise comes, you do not let it inflate you. When blame comes, you do not let it condemn you. When a body speaks, you do not let it legislate. When a bill appears, you do not let it enthrone itself. You return, quietly and as often as needed, to one. Do not mistake this for withdrawal. It is not escape. It is dominion. It is living in the world without letting the world be your lawgiver. It is presence without agreement, action without reaction. It is the practitioner's stance. Non-condemnation, because condemnation is agreement with separation. And as your reaction to appearances subsides, you will find that life arranges itself around the peace you carry. Not because you have arranged effects, but because you have honored cause. Hold to this. The way to sin no more is to stay anchored in inner God-awareness rather than sense testimony. And you will find that go becomes freedom in motion. Oneness lived in traffic. The silence traveling as you. Now let us bring this to 9 a.m. Because if it cannot live there, it is not the Christ way. Do you see that? At 9 a.m., the inbox rises up and says, "You are behind, you cannot catch up. Others are ahead, and they hold the prize." And in that instant, the old premise whispers, "God is not here. Time and pressure are powers." Do you follow that? At 9 a.m., a message arrives unanswered and says, "You are unloved, forgotten, abandoned to a private life." And again the suggestion is the same. There is a self apart from God, and that self is at the mercy of other selves. At 9 a.m. the body speaks, twinge, symptom, label, and the chorus begins. I am sick. I am not enough. I am aging under law. I am a private life under a private sentence. And beneath each line is a single claim. God is not here. At 9 a.m., a supervisor frowns or a market drops, and the thought shouts, "They have power over me, my joy, my bread, my breath." And again the serpent hisses, "There are two powers." All of these are one error wearing many costumes. There is not hypnotism and a problem and a cause besides. There is only hypnotism appearing as these stories. There isn't any other origin. How do you stop midstream? Not by wrestling the story, not by polishing it, not by arguing for your worthiness. That is feeding the rope snake. Do you see that? The moment the suggestion arises, pause, hush, withdraw consent. Recognize, this is hypnotism, not law. Then turn, inwardly and without strain, to one. Only God is. I know the truth. This is not law. And be still until reaction softens, until the breath remembers it has no master but spirit. Do not try to make something happen. Do not check the body or the inbox for proof, because that is the return. That is the sin. Rest in the knowing that God is the only presence and the only power, and let the picture find you unresponsive. Your reaction is the measure. Healing and freedom come in exact proportion to your decreased reaction to appearance. Shame, anger, self-justification are the sirens of two powers. Do you follow that? When you feel the flush to defend, to condemn, to strike, or to grovel, recognize it as the body of the suggestion hunting for a believer, and quietly refuse it air. Say within, Only God is. I know the truth. This is not law. And mean by that not a magic charm, but a reseating of premise. A return to the inner court where one is all. Understand temptation rightly, or you will fight shadows forever. Temptation is not primarily the tug toward a behavior. It is the prior lure to accept a separated identity and a separated world as the basis of choosing. In other words, it says, be immortal for a moment, and then decide. And once you agree to that, the decision is already slanted, do you see? Refuse the costume at the door. Do not enter the theater where two powers argue. Return, quickly and as often as needed, to the simple truth. Only God is. And you will find that the story loses you, and 9 a.m. becomes holy ground because you did not return. Now extend this beyond your own thought, or you will keep one foot in freedom and one in the dream. The moment you look at another and see a sinner, a sick one, a victim, or a villain, you have joined the hypnotism. Do you see that? Do you follow that? You have agreed to two powers on their behalf, and then wondered why your prayer has no life. The practitioner's stance is the Christ stance. Neither do I condemn you. Not because we are gentle humanists, not because we are permissive of wrong, but because we refuse to grant reality to the premise that would make condemnation possible. Condemnation is agreement with separation. It says there is a self apart from God who has power to be other than God's expression. And the moment you accept that you are out of the practice and into the mirage. Therefore, correct the moral impulse that rises to fix a person, to lecture, to demand repentance as if their true self were defective. Do not tell anybody that they must correct themselves. You cannot cure a snake. There isn't any. You cannot polish a shadow into light. Behold them as God made them. Witness Christ's selfhood intact, whole, innocent of the world's labels, and say within, only God is the presence and the power here, and I refuse to grant law to a second life. In other words, do not strike the rope. Do not shout at the picture on the screen. Get still and see through the suggestion. And as your reaction subsides, the picture shifts, because it never had substance apart from your consent. Healing takes place in proportion to the practitioner's reaction to the appearance. The less you react, the more reality announces itself. Do you see that? And do not mistake this for softness or permissiveness. It is not weakness to refuse condemnation. It is the strongest stand you can take, because you withhold the only life error ever had. Your belief. Anyone can condemn. Sense testimony condemns all day long. Only the dehypnotized refuse to join the chorus and instead abide in one. When you stand there, you do not give error a hiding place. You remove the theater that projected it. In that light, a brother's fear cannot find you as an accomplice. A sister's shame cannot enroll you in its courtroom. You are present without agreeing, and that presence is the liberation. Notice what happens to your relationships the minute you stop granting power to appearances. Control falls away because you no longer need people to change to make God present. Reactivity softens because there is no second power to resist. Guidance grows quiet and exact because you are no longer shouting at the rope. You do not manage their story. You do not argue their record. You abide, and your very non-condemnation becomes the Sabbath in which their true self can be felt. Sometimes forms shift swiftly, sometimes they do not. That is not your premise. Your premise is God as the only presence and the only power, and the beholding of Christ as the identity of all. So the verse becomes your lifelong practice with every face. Release, neither do I condemn you. And then remain free by not re-entering separation in thought about self or others. Walk your street and meet no sinners, no victims, no villains. Meet only God appearing, and when a suggestion rises to say otherwise, refuse it gently and return. That refusal, repeated and deepened, is compassion without compromise. And it is the way you go without returning, for yourself and for the world you touch. Do you see that? Now, your assignment. And do not treat this as a suggestion you can take or leave. Treat it as the lifeline it is if only you will listen. The logic has been plain. Only God is real. There is only one presence and one power. Error is not a second thing. Error is hypnotism, a suggestion believed. The Christ releases condemnation because he will not give life to the picture. And go and sin no more means precisely this. Do not accept separation again. Refuse to return to two powers. Do you see that? Do you follow that? Hold this as your premise for 7 days, not as theory, but as practice. And watch what happens when the rope refuses to be a snake in your consciousness. Each morning, before the world speaks, be still. 5 minutes if that is all you will give. 15 if you will love yourself that much. Hush the senses. No asking, no reaching, no treating effects. Only the simple acknowledgement. Father, thou art the only presence and the only power. One life, one mind, one soul, one spirit, one law. And I rest in that. Then be silent. Let the thoughts pass as trains you do not board. Do not check the body. Do not check the bank. Do not check the news. This is your anchoring in one. This is how you start without returning. At midday, set a quiet bell or a memory stone in your pocket, and when it sounds, glance within and ask, where have I accepted separation since morning? Where did I install a second power, a person, a symptom, a schedule, as law over me? Do not argue with what you find. Do not condemn yourself. There is no such thing as a guilty spiritual self. There isn't any. Simply withdraw consent, refuse gently, and turn again. Only God is. One breath, one resting, until reaction softens. Then continue your day from that center. In the evening, review without blame. Where did I return today, and how soon did I notice? If you wept, if you worried, if you struck at the rope, write it down. Not as a record of failure, but as a map of the places where the suggestion finds you open. Then close the book and say, neither do I condemn you, and rest again in one. This is not self-improvement. This is dehypnotization by remembrance. Do you see that? When bad news arrives, and it will come dressed convincingly, pause. Do not react. Do not speak. Do not rush to fix or defend. Feel your feet. Take one inward step and remember, there is only one presence here and only one power acting. I will not enthrone a second. Let the breath slow. From that inner stillness, let action arise if it must, and you will find it is clean, without fear urgency, and it accomplishes what it must because it issues from cause, not from panic. Refuse to check the picture for permission to rest. That is the return. That is the sin. I must tell you, only a few will value this, because it removes the thrill of judging. It ends the drama of struggle, and with it goes the parade of heroics we think we love. But it gives the peace that passes understanding. It gives dominion without domination. It gives you back to God as God's own. If you can hear that, if you will listen with the inner ear, you will not let this get stale. You will keep it fresh by practice. So ponder this and do not hurry past it. Sit with it until the words dissolve and the awareness remains. Until the verse is no longer a sentence in memory, but a place you live. Neither do I condemn you. Go, and do not return to separation. Freedom is maintained by refusing again and again the belief in two. Meditate and practice, and let the silence do the work. Blessings and aloha.